It's not you, it's them. A new report from the Howe Institute grades the financial presentations of Canada's municipality and finds that they are so baffling, it hampers councillors and voters seeking to put city governments to account. The numbers are maybe obscure, misleading, and late. We're joined by the author of that report, Bill Robson. He's also president and CEO of the Howe Institute. Great to see you.
Nice to be here. Thank you.
So what are municipalities getting wrong? What is so confusing about the way they present their numbers?
If you go to the financial statements and budgets of most companies and Ottawa, Queen's Park, Ontario government, lots of governments do this too, you will find very straightforward presentations of what they're planning to spend that you can compare to what happened last year, and then later on you can compare to what actually happened. Mm-hmm. And it's a bit ridiculous that in only one city in the country, Surrey, so give them a shout out, in British Columbia, is that possible. And in most cities, it's really impossible for anybody, even an expert, to tell what's going on, even to find the numbers in the budgets. And we think that's a pretty sorry situation. It's certainly an obstacle to accountability, and this, it's not you, it's them. When I teach a public finance course, and I tell the students, after showing them some good budgets, I show them the Toronto budget, and I say, if you can't make sense of this, it's not you, it's because it's just a mess.
So it's shocking in some ways that the largest city is unaccountable in terms of how the numbers are presented. The most shocking part of this to me, Bill, is that councillors may not have a grasp. You know, it's one thing for voters not be able to compare numbers and know what's happening, but for the people that are actually implementing policies, that seems like actually mismanagement to a kind of a horrible degree. To whom at whose feet do we place this problem? Who's doing the weird accounting?
Well, I think the councillors themselves bear some of the responsibility, because imagine if you're on the board of a not-for-profit and management gives you a budget that you just can't relate to any of what happened in the past, or that you're going to be able to relate to the future. You'd say, this is no good. You'd say, give me numbers that make sense. So it's partly that, but also there is in city governments, I think there's a lot of this idea that you do whatever you did last year. And we have seen this, actually. I've been in this game a little while now, looking at the federal and provincial governments, and we heard those arguments from them. There were many years when their budgets and their financial statements didn't match up, but over time they fixed that problem. And so now parliamentarians, I mean, there's still an awful lot to stay on top of, and they don't always do it, but at least you're not stuck right at the beginning, going through possibly hundreds of pages of a budget and then finding a number and you can't even tell if it's the right number.
So given that we're seeing an F for some of the biggest municipalities in the country, where does that leave us in terms of how we know how we're doing? I mean, it's our tax dollars, they're being deployed for some of the most important services that we experience as citizens. How do we have a sense of whether it's being fiscally managed well or poorly, or how do we know?
People pay a lot of attention to budgets because the future is always more exciting than the past. But one thing you can do is you can go to the financial reports, because the financial reports are by and large good. Mm-hmm. They follow proper public sector accounting standards. They get clean audits. So at that end of the cycle, it's actually quite good. What people would be surprised to discover is that most cities, most years, run quite healthy surpluses. It's the one level of government in Canada that's actually in fiscally quite good shape. Mm-hmm. In fact, maybe almost too much so, because one of the things that you notice when you look at the financial statements is a lot of these big capital projects that in budgets look so expensive end up getting built late or not at all. They collect all this money and then it sits on their balance sheets doing not very much, and they're always pleading poverty, and every budget cycle you hear we're going to have to cut services and raise property taxes. Actually, they could afford a lot more infrastructure spending than they're doing. So I think it does matter as a practical
or you say more infrastructure spending, I say lower our property taxes.
That would be another possibility.
Is it a possibility?
Or lower development charges, because a lot of this money comes from these development charges, which raise the price of new housing. And I think you can make a pretty good case that for the new homeowner to pay all of that money for infrastructure that's going to last for decades and is going to benefit people over a wider area is not fair. And we've got a bit of a housing affordability issue.
Right.
So that would be one way of addressing that.
Now, when you say the rear view look is actually a fairly accurate one, who looks at that other than, you know, eggheads like you? Does anybody, do voters, does anybody go back and actually report on the rear view?
They don't as much as I think they should.
Yeah.
And this is a frustrating thing. I mean, we've done federal, provincial budget coverage, and it's like a magician who's got the shiny bauble over here to distract your attention from the ugly report of what's actually happening. So people in general don't pay enough attention to the past. But in the case of the municipal finances, I'd say it's kind of rational ignorance in a way, because if you know that the numbers are such a mess at the budgeting side, that even if you've looked at the past, you're not going to be able to then look at the budget for the upcoming year and even relate one thing to another. In a way, people are justified in kind of throwing their hands up and saying, well, I'm not going to be able to make any sense of this.
So why is Surrey getting it right when nobody else is? What did Surrey figure out?
It's an odd thing. I'll mention Toronto, which got an F,
yes,
and say that in October, we got a note from them saying, look, we published our budget on the same basis as the financial report, so everything's comparable. But that was in October of the year that's now almost over.
Right.
In Surrey, they do it at the beginning. So that's just they're all doing it anyway. They're all reporting on that.
Eventually, they have to do.
Exactly. That's not that complicated to do.
Is there a political motivation not to?
I think part of the problem at the staff level, if I can put it that way, is that the biggest difference, the most important thing that's different in terms of dollars, is that capital in budgets is on a cash basis, but when they're doing the reports, like every business, not-for-profit, senior governments and so on, they amortize it over the life of the asset. I think a lot of the staff worry that if the councillors saw capital looking cheap, just a small amount of expense every year, they might, spend even more than they do.
Oh, dear.
I don't dismiss that argument, but when you look at the gulf of understanding that arises from the numbers being on a different basis, I just don't think you can justify it.
Bill, great to see you.
Thank you.
The CD Howe's Bill Robson.